I let my son-in-law move in while he was looking for work. 3 months later, he said, "I'm not leaving." I smiled. Fine. I sold his car and donated the money to charity. The next day, he found his bank account frozen. Look, I've always been the type to help family out when they're down on their luck. My daughter married this guy 5 years ago, and honestly, he seemed decent enough at first. Nothing spectacular, but he treated her okay and held down a steady job at a local warehouse. That all changed when the company downsized last spring. Daughter came to me with tears in her eyes, explaining how they were struggling to make rent with just her income from the veterinary clinic. She's always been my baby, even at 28, so of course I offered to help. My house has 3 bedrooms, and since I've been living alone since my husband passed 4 years ago, I had plenty of space. "Mom, would it be possible for us to stay with you for just a few weeks while he finds something new?" she asked, wringing her hands the way she used to as a kid when she was nervous about asking for something. I didn't hesitate. "Of course, sweetheart. You know you're always welcome here." So they moved in with a couple of suitcases and a promise that it would be temporary. The first few weeks were actually pretty nice. Having voices in the house again felt good, and my daughter helped with cooking and cleaning without being asked. Her husband seemed genuinely motivated to find work, spending hours on his laptop applying for jobs and going to interviews. But then something shifted. Week 3 turned into week 6, and I started noticing changes. He stopped getting dressed for interviews. Instead of job hunting, he'd park himself on my couch at 8 in the morning with a beer and watch TV until dinner. My grocery bills doubled, then tripled. The guy could eat like a linebacker at an all-you-can-eat buffet. When I gently suggested he might want to expand his job search or consider temporary work, he'd get defensive. "The market's tough right now," he'd say, not looking away from whatever reality show was playing. "I'm not going to take just any job. I have standards." Standards. Right. Standards that apparently didn't include contributing to household expenses or even doing basic chores. My daughter was working double shifts at the clinic to save money, coming home exhausted while her husband lounged around like he was on some kind of vacation. The real wake-up call came when I found out he'd been telling people at the local bar that he was set for life living with his rich mother-in-law. Rich. I'm a retired teacher living on a pension and Social Security. I'm comfortable, but I'm not exactly rolling in cash like some trust fund baby. Update. Some of you are asking why my daughter didn't see what was happening. The truth is, manipulation doesn't happen overnight. This guy was really good at making her feel guilty about pressuring him. He'd convinced her that his mental health was fragile and that any stress about work would make things worse. She was walking on eggshells trying to be supportive. But trust me, things are about to get really interesting. What would you do if someone tried to make your house their permanent vacation spot? By month 2, the situation had gotten ridiculous. He'd started rearranging my furniture to make the living room more comfortable for his all-day TV marathons. He moved my reading chair to make room for this massive recliner he had delivered. When I asked about it, he said it was a necessity for his back problems and that he'd used his unemployment check to buy it. That's when I started paying closer attention to his finances. Call it nosy, but when someone's living in your house rent-free, eating your food, and running up your utilities, you tend to get curious about their money situation. What I discovered made my blood boil. He wasn't just collecting unemployment. He'd been doing odd jobs for cash under the table, probably making more money than when he was employed. But instead of saving it or contributing to household expenses, he was spending it on beer, video games, and that ridiculous chair. My daughter had no idea because he kept telling her the unemployment barely covered his personal expenses. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in month 3. I was making breakfast when he strolled into the kitchen in his boxer shorts and flip-flops, opened my refrigerator like he owned the place, and started making himself a sandwich with the last of the turkey I'd bought for my lunch that week. "Morning," he said casually, like this was totally normal behavior. "Good morning," I replied, watching him pile half a pound of meat on his sandwich. "Any interviews today?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Nah, not really feeling it today. Besides, this setup works pretty well, don't you think? You get company, we get a place to stay. Win-win." That's when he said the words that changed everything. "Honestly, I'm thinking we might just stay permanently. Make this arrangement official." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean by official?" He shrugged, taking a massive bite of his sandwich. "You know, like family helping family. I mean, you're all alone in this big house anyway. Seems like a waste." "And what about finding a job?" Another shrug. "Why fix what's not broken? You seem to be doing fine financially, and I'm keeping you company. It's like having a live-in handyman." Handyman. This guy who hadn't fixed so much as a loose doorknob in 3 months was calling himself a handyman. I watched him finish his sandwich and head back to the couch, and something inside me just snapped. That afternoon, after my daughter left for work, I sat him down for what I thought would be a serious conversation about expectations and timelines. Instead, it turned into the most infuriating 20 minutes of my life. "I think it's time we talked about your job search progress," I began diplomatically. He muted the TV but didn't look at me. "What about it?" "Well, it's been 3 months, and I'm concerned that you're not making much effort anymore." Now he looked at me, and his expression was nothing like the polite, respectful son-in-law I thought I knew. "Look, let's be honest here. You're lonely, I provide company. You have extra space, we need a place to live, this works for everyone. But the original agreement was temporary, until you found work." He leaned back in his recliner and smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "Plans change, I've decided I'm not leaving." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact and dismissive, like my opinion didn't matter in my own house, was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who was temporarily down on his luck. I was dealing with someone who had planned this whole thing. What if I don't agree with that decision? I asked, keeping my voice level. His smile widened. Well, that would make things awkward for your daughter, wouldn't it? I mean, she's not going to choose between her mother and her husband. That would really hurt her. There it was. The threat I'd been sensing but couldn't quite name. He was using my love for my daughter as leverage to turn my home into his personal resort. I smiled back at him, the sweetest grandmother smile I could manage. You know what? You're absolutely right. He looked surprised by my agreement, but pleased. Great, I'm glad we understand each other. Oh, we definitely understand each other now, I said, still smiling. You're not leaving. Exactly. Good. Update. The comments are split between people calling me a pushover and others saying I'm planning something big. To those asking if I just gave up, no way. Sometimes the best response to someone who thinks they're clever is to let them think they've won. Trust me when I say this story is about to take a turn he never saw coming. What's the longest you'd let someone take advantage of you before you fought back? That night, I didn't sleep much. I spent hours thinking about the situation, about my daughter, and about what kind of precedent I was setting by letting this manipulative jerk walk all over me. By morning, I had a plan. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. While they were both out the next day, I did some investigating. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. He'd been telling people at his regular bar that he'd figured out the system and didn't need to work anymore because his old lady, mother-in-law, was supporting him. He'd actually bragged about it to enough people that it had gotten back to some of my neighbors. I was mortified, but also furious. More importantly, I discovered that he'd been hiding money from my daughter, a lot of money. Not only was he collecting unemployment and doing cash jobs, but he'd also sold some tools and electronics that they'd owned jointly without telling her. The money was sitting in a private account she didn't know about. That's when I realized this wasn't just laziness or taking advantage of a good situation. This was financial abuse, and my daughter was the victim. Spent the next week quietly gathering information and making phone calls. My brother-in-law is a retired police officer, and he helped me understand what legal options I had. My neighbor's daughter is a lawyer, and she gave me some free advice over coffee. Most importantly, I had a long conversation with my daughter's best friend, who confirmed that she'd been worried about the changes in my daughter's behavior and their relationship. The plan I came up with wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about removing the incentive for his behavior and protecting both my daughter and myself. Step 1 was the car. His 2019 Honda Civic was parked in my driveway, and while it was technically in both his and my daughter's names, there was something interesting about the paperwork. When they'd bought it, my daughter had put down the entire payment from her savings, but they'd put both names on the title for insurance purposes. However, the loan paperwork showed that she was the primary borrower, and he was listed as a co-signer. After consulting with the lawyer neighbor, I discovered that my daughter had legal grounds to sell the car without his permission, especially since she'd been making all the payments since he lost his job. The tricky part was getting her to agree to it. That took some careful conversation. I couldn't just tell her that her husband was a manipulative jerk who was financially abusing her because she wasn't ready to hear that yet. Instead, I focused on practical concerns. Honey, I've been thinking about the car situation, I said one evening when he was out at the bar. You're making the payments, paying for insurance, and covering gas, but you're working double shifts while he drives around town all day. Does that seem fair? She looked uncomfortable. He needs the car to look for jobs. Has he been to any interviews lately? She was quiet for a long moment. Not really, but he says he's networking. At the bar? Another long pause. Mom, I know what you're thinking, but marriage is about supporting each other through tough times. It absolutely is, I agreed, but support should go both ways. When's the last time he supported you? That question hung in the air between us, and I could see her really thinking about it for the first time in months. The conversation continued over several days, and gradually she started to see what I'd been seeing. The final push came when she found out about his secret bar bragging from one of her coworkers who'd heard it from her husband. He said what? She asked, her face going pale. That he'd figured out how to never work again because his mother-in-law was taking care of everything. That night, she agreed to sell the car. Update. For those asking how I could sell someone else's car, legally it was my daughter's car. She was the primary borrower and had made every payment. The title situation was complicated, but we had legal grounds. Some of you are calling this nuclear, but honestly, we were just getting started. The car was just the beginning. What would you do to someone who bragged about scamming you? We sold the Honda to a used car dealer the next morning, while he was sleeping off another night at the bar. My daughter got the full value, about $12,000, which covered what she still owed on the loan with some left over. Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of keeping the extra money, she asked me what I thought she should do with it. Well, I said, how about we donate it to the homeless shelter downtown? You know, to help people who are actually trying to get back on their feet? She smiled for the first time in months. That's perfect. So we donated $4,000 to the local homeless shelter, specifically to their job training and placement program. The irony was not lost on either of us, but the car was just the opening move. The real strategy involved his secret bank account and his under-the-table income. My brother-in-law had explained to me how unemployment fraud investigations work. When someone collects unemployment benefits while working for cash and not reporting it, that's a federal crime. The penalties include paying back all benefits received, additional fines, and potential jail time. I'd been documenting his cash jobs for weeks. He wasn't exactly subtle about it. He'd brag about making $200 for a weekend roofing job or $300 for helping someone move, all while collecting his weekly unemployment check. The day after we sold the car, I made a phone call to the unemployment fraud hotline. I didn't do it out of spite, exactly. I did it because taxpayer money was being stolen by someone who was perfectly capable of working but chose not to. There are people who genuinely need unemployment benefits, and fraudsters like him make it harder for legitimate claims to be processed. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, his benefits were suspended pending a full review. Within 2 weeks, they'd frozen his bank accounts while they calculated how much he owed in fraudulent claims and penalties. He found out about the frozen accounts when he tried to buy beer at the convenience store and his debit card was declined. Then he tried the ATM, then he called the bank, and that's when reality came crashing down. I was in the kitchen making lunch when he stormed in, looking absolutely panicked. "Something's wrong with my bank account," he said, his voice higher than usual. "They're saying it's frozen." "Oh no," I said, not looking up from my sandwich. "That sounds serious. This has to be some kind of mistake. I need to go to the bank, but..." He trailed off, probably remembering that his transportation was, currently helping homeless people find jobs. "I'd offer to drive you," I said sweetly, "but I'm pretty busy today." That's when it hit him. "Where's my car?" "Oh, that. Your wife sold it yesterday. Didn't she tell you?" The look on his face was priceless. Confusion, then anger, then panic, as he started to piece together that his comfortable little scam was falling apart. "She can't sell my car." "Actually, she can. It was legally hers. She made all the payments, and she was the primary on the loan. You were just a co-signer." He pulled out his phone and started dialing frantically. "This is crazy. You can't just freeze someone's bank account for no reason." "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation," I said, taking a bite of my sandwich. "Maybe you should call the unemployment office. They might know something about it." The color drained from his face. For the first time since he'd moved in, he looked genuinely worried. Over the next few days, the full scope of his situation became clear. The unemployment investigation had uncovered not just his recent cash jobs, but several months' worth of unreported income. The total amount he owed in fraudulent claims, penalties, and interest was over $15,000. His bank accounts would remain frozen until he either paid the full amount or worked out a payment plan with the state. Since he'd spent most of his hidden money on beer and entertainment, he was basically broke. But the best part wasn't the financial consequences. The best part was watching him try to explain to my daughter why he had a secret bank account with thousands of dollars while she'd been working double shifts to support them. That conversation did not go well for him. "You had $8,000 saved up and you let me exhaust myself working overtime?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "I was keeping it for emergencies," he stammered. "What kind of emergencies?" He couldn't answer that, probably because the truth was that he'd been planning to use it for beer and video games indefinitely. My daughter moved back into her old bedroom that night. He spent the next week sleeping on the couch, making increasingly desperate phone calls to anyone who might lend him money or give him a place to stay. The answer was universally no. Turns out when you spend months bragging about scamming your family, people aren't eager to help when karma comes calling. His final attempt at manipulation came exactly 1 week after his accounts were frozen. He cornered me in the kitchen and tried to appeal to my sympathy. "Look, I know I made some mistakes," he said, trying to look contrite. "But I'm family. We should be able to work this out." "You're absolutely right," I said. "We are family, and that's exactly why this is so disappointing." "So, you'll help me?" "Oh, I am helping you," I smiled. "I'm helping you learn that actions have consequences. I'm helping you understand that you can't manipulate people indefinitely. And I'm helping you find motivation to get a real job and contribute to society." His face darkened. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" "I think I'm a 70-year-old woman who's seen enough nonsense to recognize it when it moves into my house." That's when he tried his last desperate play. "What about your daughter? This is going to hurt her too." "My daughter is a strong, intelligent woman who deserves better than someone who lies to her and steals from taxpayers. She'll be fine." And she was. Better than fine, actually. 2 days later, he packed his clothes in garbage bags and left. I have no idea where he went, and I don't particularly care. What I do know is that he's no longer my problem. My daughter stayed with me for another month, partly to save money and partly because we were both enjoying each other's company again. Without the stress of supporting a lazy, manipulative husband, she was like her old self, funny, energetic, and optimistic about the future. She filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The divorce proceedings revealed even more financial deception. He'd been hiding money, making unauthorized purchases, and had even taken out a credit card in her name without telling her. The lawyer was able to get most of those debts transferred back to him, and my daughter walked away with minimal financial damage. 6 months later, she met someone new. A veterinarian who owns his own practice, works hard, treats her with respect, and has never once suggested that he deserves to be supported by someone else's mother. As for me, I learned something important about setting boundaries and not enabling bad behavior, even when it comes from family. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to make their bad choices comfortable for them. My house is peaceful again. My grocery bills are back to normal. And I never have to worry about finding some lazy jerk in his underwear, eating my food at 7 in the morning. The unemployment fraud investigation concluded with him owing over $20,000 to the state. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, he's working construction and living in a studio apartment, paying back what he owes in monthly installments. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to him. The answer is no. He made his choices, and I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences. If anything, I probably did him a favor by forcing him to face reality before he dug himself into an even deeper hole. My daughter and I are closer than we've been in years. She's learned to trust her instincts again and isn't afraid to stand up for herself. Her new relationship is healthy and equal, built on mutual respect instead of manipulation. And every time I drive past the homeless shelter where we donated that car money, I think about how something good came out of that whole mess. Real people who genuinely needed help got resources to improve their lives, while someone who was perfectly capable of helping himself learned that the world doesn't owe him a free ride. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their choices. And sometimes the best way to help someone is to stop helping them avoid those consequences. He thought he was clever, manipulating his way into a permanent vacation at my expense. But he underestimated a retired teacher who'd spent 30 years dealing with people who thought they could outsmart the system. The house is quiet now, in the best possible way. And every morning when I make my coffee and read the paper without anyone demanding I cook them breakfast or do their laundry, I smile and remember that sometimes the best solution to a problem is simply refusing to be part of it anymore. Justice served, family protected, and dignity intact. Not bad for a lonely old widow who supposedly didn't know what she was doing.